Welcome to Divorced Muslims, A Second Chance, the podcast that uplifts voices for both divorced and single Muslims. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to all our viewers. Welcome to another episode of Divorced Muslims, A Second Chance podcast, season 3. In today's episode, we are joined by Sister Alina. So Sister Alina, assalamu alaikum. Please introduce yourself to our viewers.
My name is Alina. I'm 26 and I'm from London.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Okay, Sister Alina, I guess my first question to you is, what's your marriage search been like?
Well, it's been interesting. Obviously, I'm 26, so it's not been a long one yet. For me, I'm one of the girls who grown up with, happily ever after fairy tales. But of course, the older you get, the more you realize it's not as easy as finding Prince Charming, especially in this generation where it's a lot harder to find someone who's willing to open up, to communicate with you. And these are all things that I think are very important for any relationship. So I'm not going to lie, it's been a bit disappointing to see what the status of the marriage search is for a lot of people nowadays. But when it comes to facing these challenges, I like to go back to thinking about how everything's exactly how Allah has planned for us. These tests are there to prepare us or give us patience, make us stronger. So yeah, I think it's important to be positive throughout this whole process.
Okay, so I guess we're going to contextualize this, and that comes with my next question, which is, why don't you share some of your experiences, if you're comfortable, that is in relation to your marriage search?
So to be honest, I don't have many. So when it comes to finding potentials, I'm not on the apps. I find them off-putting. I've heard a lot of horror stories, and also just don't see myself finding my spouse that way. I'm sure it works for some people. It's just not for me. But having said that, there were 2 potentials I actually met through social media. So not on the apps, but just on socials. And they were genuinely great guys. I'm sure whoever they end up with will be very lucky. It just didn't work out between me and them due to living arrangements / location.
Okay, can we explore that a little bit further?
Sure.
This whole thing about location, isn't it fair to say that you and the other party would have known where each of you are residing right from the outset? So the question I'm trying to ask you here is, why would something be an issue that was already in existence from the beginning later down the line?
So with the first potential, it was really my first experience. I was still kind of getting to know who I was, what I was looking for. And as time went on, I realized that I would be really uncomfortable moving away from everything I've ever known. My friends, my family, my work, everything. I've grown up in the same small part of London. So to have to navigate marriage, because there's a lot you have to take on, right? There's a lot you need to learn and adapt to. So to go through all of that, as well as learning a whole new lifestyle in his location, I think would have been really overwhelming for me. Again, I'm sure it works for other people, just not for me. And so when I was speaking to this potential, we did speak about some sort of compromise, maybe meeting in the middle somewhere, but we realized that it really wasn't realistic. We'd be putting too much pressure on each other. So we decided to call it quits, but it was respectful and mutual. And again, he's an amazing person. I wish him nothing but the best.
Okay. What about the second experience?
So again, he was a great guy, but we established quite early on, because of course I had been through this experience before, that I wasn't willing to move to the other side of the country. And also, there are other reasons why it didn't work out too, communication style, different mindsets, different outlooks on life. So yeah, we just didn't click. I think there's nothing wrong with that. Again, I wish him all the best.
Okay. So let's just say, right, you come across a potential who's ticking all the boxes that you're looking for, everything that you're looking for, everything's being ticked, bar one box, and that's the location aspect. What are you doing in that scenario?
Dude, it's hard because, of course, no one's perfect. You're not going to get 10 out of 10. And if that is the one box that's not being ticked, of course, it's something that I would have to consider. But there would have to be major, workarounds. There would have to be some sort of, are you willing to, take me to my favorite restaurants in my area, or whatever it may be, come and visit my mum whenever I want. I think in that situation, there'd have to be some sort of meeting in the middle. And with the first potential, it would have been a lot from my side. So if we can work around it, I guess we can discuss it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And of course, London's a big city. Surely there's got to be someone there that you can match with. Okay. Apart from the location challenges, any other challenges that you faced in your search for marriage?
I think one of the big ones is the unserious people. So the ones who will kind of get your hopes up and then, switch up like a week later for no reason. They'll fill your head with dreams and promises. And yeah, I'll tell my parents about you. And they'll give you just enough attention to kind of keep you there, not enough to actually do something about it, which is really disheartening for people who are seriously looking for marriage. Because it's very common. I've heard it from my friends. I've heard it from people I know. Online, you hear the same stories. I think these people are coming from a place of hurt, perhaps. I'm not sure, but I think their fear of committing to someone is bigger than their fear of hurting someone. They'd rather get, the attention of a bunch of women rather than commit to one and have a serious long-term relationship. So, it gets really frustrating to have to deal with people who are pretending to be serious, but they're not.
Yeah, okay. We'll come back to that, right? Still sticking with your experiences. Now, the viewers don't know this, but I'm sure you don't mind me saying that. Actually, you attended one of our marriage events in July of last year. And Allahumma barik, I can only keep this factual. As a host of that marriage event, one thing I would say to the viewers is that, Sister Alina was by far the most popular sister there at the event. And I'm defining popularity by, a lot of brothers saying that, look, we take interest in her, but either for the location reasons or age gap reasons, we can't obviously, follow this up kind of thing. What I wanted to ask you is, and you obviously, just to reiterate to the audience, that you came with your mum and your dad at this marriage event, and it was your first ever marriage event. So I want to ask you about what your experience was like, and talk me through it.
It was a really good event. Of course, I was very nervous because it was my first one. Mum and dad were there. We don't really speak about marriage like that, so to have them sitting behind me, knowing that I'm speaking to potentials, was very interesting. But in terms of the people at the event, it was a really warm, welcoming environment. Knowing that everyone's there for the same thing, the volunteers are there to help you out. You got friendly faces. It was a good experience, all in all. Basically, there wasn't anyone who was made me feel intimidated. In terms of speaking to the potentials, I think it was really helpful to have the cards that you had made that had all of our basic information: age, height, location, blah blah blah. Because we got to skip that small talk, and of course, you're given only a few minutes with this person. There were a few guys that, sat down next to me. We would look at each other's cards and just kind of shake our heads because either it was location or age, as you said before. And I'm sure they're great guys, but it just didn't work out. So we would just instead talk about, how's the marriage event going for you? So everyone is really friendly. Of course, you get one or two that are a bit questionable, but for the most part, I much preferred this than the thought of sitting on an app, because you got to see the person for who they are rather than just a profile. Yeah, I'd recommend it, actually.
All right. Actually, I guess I've never actually asked you this. I appreciate there weren't any matches for you for a number of reasons. Was there anyone that actually caught your eye at that marriage event? I'm not asking you to mention names.
Yeah, there were one or two.
Okay. And was it because of location and age and whatnot that you couldn't pursue, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you attend a marriage event again?
Yeah, I'd do it again. Maybe not that far, but
yes, for the audience, this event was actually in Bolton. So yeah, maybe inshallah, if we hold an event towards the West Midlands ends, or maybe towards near to London, maybe if you're looking for marriage, you can attend that inshallah. Okay, so let's talk about from a general perspective, right? You talked about your personal experiences now, but from a perspective of the angle of just British Muslims, right? We know that British Muslims are finding it difficult to get married. This can't be disputed. In your opinion, why do you think people are finding it difficult to find a spouse in the British Muslim community?
so aside from, the reasons I've said before, I think generally, I think it's difficult to balance, Islam and also living in the UK. I think unfortunately it's really easy to fall into dating culture or, you know, uh, falling into putting yourself in a vulnerable position to get hurt. And I mentioned earlier how people are carrying a lot. Everyone's got a story that will make you cry. There are people out there carrying a lot of hurt. And I think for that reason, people are scared to open up again when it comes to actually looking for marriage. People are scared of, letting their guard down. And it doesn't even have to be like a past dating experience. It could be an engagement that's broken off or just a rejection in general. Um, in those cases, I can't imagine the kind of trauma they would be holding on to. And so I think in those cases, perhaps walking away from, something so intimidating seems easier than going through that pain again, if that makes sense.
It's an interesting perspective for sure. Okay, let's focus on mental health. Is there a connection between the marriage search and mental health?
Yes, definitely. I'm a big believer that I think everyone needs therapy. Even if you think you're healthy, I think everyone needs it. But I think it's just as important as looking after your physical health. A lot of people say the classic example of if you've broken your arm, you're going to go to see a doctor, right? Um, Same thing as if you've got any sort of trauma. Even if you don't, it's good to just have someone to talk to, whether it's a therapist or not. Having a good support system behind you is very important. I think, life is full of curveballs. You're never going to know when the next bad thing's going to happen, unfortunately. And so to me, taking care of your mental health is really important because, when the bad times do come, you're more equipped to deal with them in a healthy way rather than spiraling or lashing out. It's like when you go to the gym and you make your muscles stronger. At the same time, if you're working on your mental health, you're making yourself stronger to deal with, things that will inevitably go wrong. And the marriage search is full of, again, like rejections and mean comments and all sorts. So you really have to build yourself up and keep yourself up, more importantly. A lot of girls I hear are, they express their interest for an emotionally mature guy. And that doesn't mean someone who's like serious all the time. We want someone who can joke around. But it also means that when the going gets tough, he's not gonna start lashing out at you. He's not gonna start taking his frustrations out on you. He's gonna be able to handle it.
How important is financial stability in a man to you?
It is important, would like to be provided for. But at the same time, I'm not one of the girls who are, um, you know, uh, materialistic. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Me personally, I'm not one for big brands, to cause designer things. For example, when it comes to like gift giving, I much prefer a thoughtful gift rather than an expensive one. He knows that I like reading or journaling or whatever it may be. And he goes, this made me think of you. I would much, much prefer that than like, say, a Louis Vuitton bag, for example. I think he doesn't need to be making the most money. He doesn't need to be a millionaire, but someone who's happy to provide for me is definitely what I'm looking for.
Fair. Sticking to the finances, what is your Mahr requirement, even if it's a range that you give us?
I'm going to say around 5K and a cat.
5K and a cat.
Yes.
Could you explain the cat bit?
Sure. My mom won't let me get a cat. I've always wanted one. And she said when I get married, I can get one. So that's in the contract.
So what if you come across a brother who has, an allergy to cats, but he's ticking all the other boxes?
I'm sure there's an allergy pill we can find.
Wow. Okay. That's a new one, that is. All right. Would you consider someone who is divorced?
Oh, I mean, okay. I know that there's like a huge unfair stigma around it. But I think for me personally, I'd like to experience, all my firsts with someone who's also experiencing their firsts, someone that I can grow with. And of course, Allah knows best, if that's what's meant for me, then I'm not completely closing the door on it. But it's not, again, what I'm, looking for.
Okay. What is the difference between having standards and having unrealistic expectations?
So I would say that social media has got a lot to do with this. I think, spending your time watching reels and TikToks, you come across all these couples and you think that everything has to be 100% perfect. But reality is different. I remember growing up, we would watch all these movies and think that, oh, that's so cute and romantic, but it's just a movie. It's not actually going to happen. Whereas now you have, again, like TikToks and Reels who are of real people. They're not actors reading from a script. It's, actual married couples talking about their lives. And even though deep down we know that they'll only post a glamorized version of what's actually going on. We still have that kind of hope that, okay, that seems realistic. That's something that I want. I think that's where a lot of the unrealistic expectations come from, is where you see just the happy side. You don't see the behind the scenes of, their arguments and what's going on there, their differences and how they work them out. Whereas I think standards for me is having standards is not settling for a life that is less than what you're currently living. Now, of course, like the guy is not going to have a magic wand. He's not going to make all your dreams come true. But to meet your basic criteria, I think it's worth, thinking about what really matters to you going 10, 20 years down the line. If you were to look back and think, is that what I really wanted? Is that what really mattered to me? Asking yourself these questions.
Yeah. Okay. Apps, that's a big player when it comes to the Muslim marriage search, right? Do you think apps have improved or damaged the marriage search?
I mean, look, when they were made, I'm sure they were made with the best intentions, but I think they've definitely made things harder. People are just exposed to way too much choice now. It's the whole thought process of like, it's okay if I swipe on this person, there's another better person waiting for me. They don't see the person for who they are. They just kind of see the profile, they see the pictures, they see the basic information. And I don't know, I feel like it's a bit dehumanizing. That's why I stay off them. I feel like it's a bit of a business exchange rather than looking for marriage. And I know that it's kind of sorting out the complication of seeing if you're even compatible first. But, the horror stories that I've heard of people taking advantage of innocent people, uh, yeah, I'm not one for the apps, basically.
Okay. In your opinion, right, the people who are on the apps, what percentage would you say are genuinely serious and what percentage would you say are emotionally browsing?
Oh, I'm not on them, so I really can't comment. But from what I've heard, what I've seen from friends and online, I'd say it's like, well, I'd hope it's like more serious people. And I'd say 60% serious, 40% unserious.
Okay. And I appreciate you're not on them, right? But do you think apps reward honesty or do they reward perfection?
Perfection.
Why'd you say that?
I think as soon as you see one wrong thing in their little profile, it's easy to just kind of swipe. As I said, they want, 100%. Um, yeah, perfection for sure.
Okay. I'm going to put down an argument, right? And I want to know your response to that.
Okay.
The argument is that subconsciously, most British Muslims don't actually want marriage. They want the benefits of marriage without responsibility. They want companionship, but not commitment. So marriage has become optional and not a priority. What's your thoughts around this argument?
I think people don't realize how many responsibilities you get after marriage. Like, for example, people like to joke about it's my right to have 4 wives or my right to have a big house. But I don't know if they realize everything that comes with.
So I don't know what it is, right? The sisters complain about polygamy and 4 wives, and yet they are the ones that raise it in conversations. I didn't even raise it today, you did. And this has happened a few times. So since you raised it, not me, what's your take on, we know Islamically it's permissible, so I'm not asking you whether it's allowed or not, but what's your What's your take on polygamy?
God. I just don't think it's realistic in today's day and age, especially in this country. I don't think there's anyone who grows up dreaming of being someone's second wife. um, you know, Islamically, it's there for a reason. From what I've heard, it's from when, back in the day, you would have single mothers who husbands passed away in war who needed taking care of. And in those situations, I can understand where it would be, acceptable, appealing even. But if we're looking at people who are single, never married, I just don't see that um, kind of, with today's expectations and culture and the world that we live in, I don't see it working out, basically.
That's interesting that you say that. A couple of things from there, right? I don't believe that's correct, that it's only prescribed because of, to cater for single mothers. My understanding is even if a brother wants to get a second wife because it makes him happy, that's more than sufficient. That's what Sheikh Saleh Al Fawzan has said. Just looking at it from another angle, I think you'll have many single mothers perhaps getting upset over your comment there. Because they'll be like, hold on, we're single mothers in Britain. We do not want to be a part of a polygamous setup. Some of them would be upset, but yeah.
Yeah, of course. No, I don't mean to upset anyone. There are single mothers who are absolutely killing it and don't need it. Sometimes it's, you want companionship though, and these situations can get complicated if it's something that will make the guy happy, will make the girl happy, and they come to some sort of agreement where it genuinely will work. You have the first wife's permission. Sure. I just, again, for myself, don't see it.
Do you need the first wife's permission?
You tell me, dude.
And how, I mean, we can get a student of knowledge to answer this one. I'm just going to stay silent.
Mm, I think the
Sounds
single
like,
mothers are going to be
mhm,
more upset with you than
I didn't
me
say
now.
anything. All right, moving on. Um, Another argument I'm going to put forward here, right, is that many people would say that the British Muslim marriage crisis is self-inflicted. This
Mm.
is kind of things that we've already discussed, unrealistic standards. But then there's other aspects, for example, fear of divorce or image obsession. What do you think of that? Do you think it's self-inflicted?
I think the fear of divorce and like image obsession, reputation, all of that has always been there. But because of like, unfortunately, divorce rates increasing, um, the fear is bigger now more than ever. What I will say is I think there's a whole new like rise on this men versus women thing. I think that's so damaging to how we approach marriage now because you hear some of the, of course I understand, Allah's made us both different, but the way that people are going about it is like as if we're two different species. Um, I remember when the word simp was first taking off. I don't know if you remember. Um, and all of a sudden it became cool to like not even talk to a woman, not even look in their direction. um, uh,
I mean, that is the Islamic position, right? As long
of
as they're not family members.
Sure, but you're allowed to, like a woman, approach them if you are interested in marriage, right? As in
Yeah, through the
ask for
correct
the,
parameters.
yeah,
Yeah,
of course,
yeah.
yes. Um, but all of a sudden, it was like any kind of sense of romance was uncool, and so I think it's taught behavior. I think it's damaging, and I think it's unfair on the women who want that romance and want that kind of relationship. I think it's calmed down a lot more nowadays. I think. Um, But yeah, I think people tend to forget that we are one human race rather than two separate entities. I think our differences can actually bring us closer if we are willing to learn more about each other rather than fight over them.
Okay, let's apply this argument to you that the marriage search is self inflicted. So, what if somebody was to say to you that actually, Alina, the reason why you're not married is because of you yourself? Not in a derogatory way, but actually could be your criteria is too narrow, or you'd be looking for an X amount of time, and surely you need to change something, and it's perhaps unrealistic what you're looking for or impossible, and that you've inflicted it upon yourself. What would you say to that argument?
Wow. I don't know. I try and be optimistic. I try and keep an open mind. And, even with, say, the first guy I was speaking to, even though he was out of London, I still, was willing to come to some sort of compromise. I think when you really want something, and marriage is something that I do want, you're willing to uh, kind of compromise and push your boundaries a little bit. So I wouldn't say that I'm completely, narrow-minded when it comes to the search. Perhaps I, could be doing more. Like I could be on the apps, I could give them a chance, but I don't think it's self-inflicted, basically. I think it's just circumstances.
Fair enough. Okay, so parents or family involvement is the next theme.
Mm.
When they are involved, where do you draw the line between advice and control?
So I think family is a big part of marriage. A lot of people say that like the marriage isn't just between two people, it's between the families too. They do play a huge part. However, it's very easy to slip into that kind of, them taking control.
So, for example, you come across a brother
Hmm.
who is a strong potential. He comes to your house. There isn't anything per se, quote unquote, wrong with him, but you're just not feeling him, right? Maybe you don't have that chemistry with him. But your father and mother are like, hold on, Alina, we think this is a good match. He's comes from a good family, good job, etc., etc. So they're advising you, or they're suggesting to you, look at him, explore him further. You're saying, nah, he's not for me. So what I'm saying is, when does that become advice and when is it controlling?
I think when it comes to my parents, Alhamdulillah, we have, even though we don't speak about marriage that much, if I'm unhappy, they will know. Of course, uh, mum has been through it. She understands how, confusing this time can be. So I'm all for her advice and her help. But if it gets to a point where they're like, no, just do it, or there's no harm in taking it further, that's when I feel like, no, that's giving the other person false hope. I wouldn't want to be the person that um causes harm to someone else. So if I know that I'm not feeling it, but they're saying to take it further anyways, something's not right there. I feel like that would be wasting my time, their time. Yeah, I think that's not fair.
Okay. So next question.
Mhm.
Often what happens is a divorced person finds that once their status is known, i.e., that they are divorced, once that becomes known, interest in them drops sharply. They therefore consider delaying disclosure of the fact that they are divorced just to be seen as a quote unquote person first. Now, if someone's delaying disclosure of such information, what would be your response to that?
As in, if I'm in that situation.
No, so somebody's delayed disclosure of the fact that they are divorced and they tell you later down the line.
Mm.
What would be your response or how would you react?
Look, I can't imagine how, you know, strong you must be to have to deal with that kind of trauma and that kind of experience. But to hide such a major thing about yourself, I think isn't fair on the person that you're getting to know. So it wouldn't be fair on me. Um, I understand that having that on your kind of marriage profile instantly makes things harder. And I can't imagine being in that position. But at the same time, if you're looking to start something new with someone, you got to make sure that foundation is strong. You can't be starting it with lies. If you're going to cover up parts of yourself, such a big part of yourself, I think that that's not how you want to go about, starting again, because the last thing you want is to, you know, cause them or yourself more pain.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about fear based marriages. And my question is fear a valid reason to marry someone? So, for example, one may say that options get worse or decrease after the age of 30. So, fear is essentially put in that person's heart or mind. Do you think fear is a valid reason to marry?
No, um, I think it's really sad that that is the situation. I understand it's the reality, but um, what I hear a lot is mums telling their younger girls to kind of hurry up because of the biological clock thing. But I don't think that's a reason to rush things, because it's much better to marry late than to marry wrong. I think thinking about the fears is a bit short term, whereas you're going to be spending the rest of your life with this person. So I think it's important to focus on, that the fact that you're going to be with this person, living with this person for the rest of your life, rather than focusing on your fear of I'm getting older now. I'm getting, time's running out, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a question for you, right?
Mhm.
Why is a man who's divorced often seen as experienced, but a divorced woman is seen as baggage?
Hmm. Um, I wish I knew. Um, but I will say I think it stems from like the South Asian culture. What I mean is like I hear a lot of stories where the man could be completely in the wrong, but the aunties will always gossip and blame the woman. They'll say stuff like she wasn't patient enough, she didn't fight for it, she didn't, just kind of tough it out. And I think that's completely unfair. I think it's something that should be old news, but unfortunately is still carrying on less and less now. But um, I think that's the only place that I can think of that this kind of mindset stems from.
Green flags are more important than red flags. Agree or disagree?
I think it's important to consider both. Some people see like one red flag and they just leave. Um, but it's important to remember that no one's going to be 100% perfect. No one's sent down like that. We all gotta, find things that we're willing to kind of move past, I think. And as long as, the red flags are not major, they could be worked on. I think it's more beneficial to focus on the green flags and be optimistic and give the person the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, interesting. And finally, what do you think the solutions are to the problem of the difficulties in finding a spouse?
I mean, if we had a realistic solution, we'd all be married, right? But I will say, I think the world would be a bit of a better place if we all worked on ourselves a little bit more, if we confronted some of our demons, if we worked on healing ourselves, being more compassionate towards others, um, and also knowing what it is that you truly want from a marriage. Not just the dates and the fancy wedding and whatnot. It's what you actually want in a partner, someone that you're going to raise your kids with, etc. I think we all make these things harder than they actually are. So whether it's taking a small step of, practicing managing your emotions or focusing more on like giving rather than receiving, um, I think these small things can make a huge difference. And I guess I just hope that everyone finds what it is that they're looking for.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're going to play a game, and
Yay.
it's called red light, green light. Where you're going to say, after I tell you about a potential, whether you're giving him the red light, the green light, and you've got the option of an amber light as well. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
Right. So, a potential who has no job but has extremely good deen.
Ooh. Amber.
Potential on the deen but has a previous criminal conviction.
Red light.
A potential with a social media page with many opposite gender followers.
Red light.
Potential does not talk to his family, so basically lives independently.
Oh. Amber. I guess it depends on the reason, isn't it?
Person or a potential who has a bad past but is a good person today.
Or amber.
Person with no education and earns 25k and is 30 plus in age.
Goodness. Amber.
Here's one for you. A potential that is ticking all boxes but lives 3 hours of a drive from you.
I'm going to say red. Sorry.
Okay. Well done. Are you ready for the next segment, which is our rapid fire round?
Go ahead. Fire away.
Okay. Once you're married, where would you take your spouse to eat on a first date?
He should be taking me, but I don't know, a nice like candlelit dinner.
You know when you say he should be taking you, are you going to be cooking on that night or?
No.
Right. Anyway, what is the best age to get married?
It's around 25.
What percentage of British Muslims looking for marriage are serious about marriage?
I'm gonna say like 60, 65 maybe.
If your spouse says to you that they want you off social media, what would be your response?
No.
How long should one get to know a potential before making the decision to marry them?
At least 4 or 5 months.
What method is the most effective to find a spouse? Apps, marriage events, matchmakers, matrimonial websites, marriage bureaus?
Oh gosh. I mean, I liked the marriage event, so maybe that one.
Would you sign a prenuptial agreement?
I'd be open to discussing something.
Mental health or physical health?
Mental.
What do you think it takes to be in a marriage that lasts forever?
Trust, communication, and romance.
If there was a book written on you, what would be the title of the book?
Gobi Gushi Gobi. I'm joking now. It would be probably like The Struggles of a Hopeless Romantic.
And what do British Muslims who are looking for marriage say privately but hesitate to admit publicly?
Oh, I'd say like trauma, past bad experiences.
Okay, well done. That's a rapid fire round come to an end, which then brings us to our final segment, which is profile time. And so for all of the viewers listening, this is your moment to focus, because now we're going to do a profile for this sister who is looking for marriage. And as I've already mentioned, she did attend our marriage event in July of last year with her mum and her dad, and she was very popular there. She generated a lot of interest. So let's
I
do
don't know
this.
about popular, by the way. So
I was the host, and I can confirm that you were. Right. Anyway,
okay,
so profile. Let's talk about you. Right. What's your age?
26.
Your height?
5'5", but I like to wear heels.
Your location?
London.
Your ethnicity?
British Pakistani.
And your occupation?
I'm a baker.
Moving on to what you're looking for. What is your age range that you're looking for?
Okay, I'd say 23 to 31.
Height preference?
Don't have one, just as long as you're not shorter than me.
Location preference?
London, please.
Ethnicity preference?
Pakistani.
Occupation preference?
Don't have one.
And in summary, apart from what you've already mentioned, what are you looking for?
Someone who is understanding, caring, willing to build something beautiful together.
Thank you very much, and Jazakallah khair, Sister Alina, for being a guest on our podcast.
Thank you very much, Mohammed.
If you fit the criteria of the guest today, and if you are interested in considering the guest for marriage, then please email us the following details: your name, age, location, height, occupation, ethnicity, marital status, family contact name, and family contact details. Our email address is divorcedmuslims@gmail.com. Remember the golden rule: only family details will be exchanged. If we have no family details, then the request will be ignored. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, or if you want to contact us, then please email us. Our email address is divorcedmuslims@gmail.com.